Thanks, Megan. Hey, I'm Richard Kerslake from the FIDO Alliance, and I'll spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about FDO. What is it? And frankly, why should you care? And we'll go through some scenarios of examples of how FDO can be applied to different application areas, whether it's industrial or retail or even automotive. So with that, I will share the screen and we'll take you through some of this material. So the first thing to ask is, what problem does FDO solve? Is it a problem you have that you need to even worry about? Well, the way we look at the onboarding issue is that when a new enterprise or edge or IoT system is installed and that into a facility, then there's always going to be a period when those new devices are onboarded to a management platform. Now, what is a facility? Well, a facility could be a factory or a hospital, or it could be even a vehicle, or it could be a store. So the definition of facility can be very broad. And as for the platform itself could be something that's an on-premise or closed network solution. It could be an internet cloud, or it could be a hybrid of both. And again, we're going to cover that question in some detail a little bit later in the presentation, and Jeff will come back to it in his presentations later in the day. So what does FDO do? FDO's goal is to provide a secure plug and play solution for onboarding for pretty much any device, any network. And we'll really talk about what do we mean by any device and what do we mean by any network. But for the moment, let's assume that pretty much a very broad range of products, regardless of what processors in them, what kind of compute capability they have, or even what operating system, they can probably be onboarded with FDO. So with that, let's kind of look at the world today and the world with FDO. The first thing is many companies today, when they actually onboard a solution, they send out a technician to do the work. Now, that works, but obviously there's a price to pay. It's slow, typically taking 20 minutes or more per device. And I've heard some companies talk of in excess of an hour to do that. There's a security issue there because, of course, you've got someone typing in the credentials. The credentials might not be very good. It could be default passwords, or there's always the risk, of course, of a disgruntled employee at some later date leaving those credentials out to the open world. The person doing the work needs to be skilled. I mean, they need to understand how to actually place the credentials into the device and do the onboarding to the system. When you bring that all together, of course, that really just leads to expense. What we're doing with FDO is trying to address all of those issues. So we're looking at onboarding being quick, typically a minute or so, depending on the processor. We obviously want a high level of security. Now, no solution can be absolutely secure, but we're bringing this to a much higher level of security than many manual type of solutions that are available today. We're also looking for a solution that really requires someone to either be not skilled or semi-skilled. They have access to the facility, but you don't want them to have access to the credentials. We're trying to drive down costs, and clearly that's a fundamental value of FDO. And then how is that achieved? By having an open standard. And FDO, the point I want to emphasize is that FIDO device onboard is an open standard, and by definition is available to anyone and everyone. So let's look at how that would operate and maybe drill a little more deeply into the benefits. So the goal with FDO is that you can take a device which is in its box and you ship it to the point of installation. The technician or whoever it is that's carrying out that installation, and it may just be a member of staff, not somebody who's necessarily technically skilled. The requirement on them is to provide power and network connectivity. And then after that, you power up the device and all of the onboarding and provisioning to the device management platform happens in an automated and secure fashion. And so really it's zero touch for the person doing that install. So what does that mean? As I said, zero touch for the installer. And if somebody's already using an existing zero touch solution, maybe from one of the cloud vendors, FDO can dovetail nicely with that solution. We talked about the speed, we talked about the security. I touched on the processor flexibility. Whether you're using a microcontroller from ARM, or maybe you're using a RISC-V processor, anything from maybe an M3, M4, even potentially lower, up to a Xeon can be supported. You're looking at low compute, you're looking at low memory footprint, less than 100 kilobytes. Any cloud, internet, intranet, closed network, multi-tenant. And again, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a moment, as will Jeff. Late binding, this is something somewhat peculiar to FDO. What does that really mean? It means that you don't need to make a decision where your device is going to onboard until literally potentially minutes before the installation. So from a value viewpoint, this means that you only need to have a single product SKU that you can ship to all of your customers, regardless of which cloud or platform they're going to onboard to. You don't need to place credentials for a particular customer or a particular cloud at the point of manufacture. And again, we'll cover that in some detail with Jeff. Multiple implementations. Obviously, there's the standard itself, which is freely available on the FIDO website. But if you want to look at software implementations, there are many versions available, whether you want open source with Linux Foundation, Edge, or Red Hat, or from other vendors that have created their own implementation. Certification, certainly important, and we'll touch on that in a second. But the beauty here is that you can come to FIDO, certify your products, and one, of course, that gives you the ability to put the FIDO logo, but equally importantly, that gives confidence to customers that the solution meets the needs of FDO, meets the specification, and it's interoperable, so they can buy a solution from multiple vendors and know that it will all come together seamlessly. One question I think people may have in their mind is, why have a standard at all? Companies may feel, look, we've created our own solution. It's tailored to the needs of our company. We really don't see value in our adopting a standard. Maybe you feel that, hey, we're building our products and our products only onboard to our cloud. So why the need for a standard? We can build something very tailored to our needs. I would argue there's a lot of value to adopting a standard, even in that type of application. Firstly, with an open standard, it was created by individuals from multiple companies that bring together a very broad range of experience, probably far more than most companies would have in terms of cyber expertise. So you're really picking the brains of a very wide range of individuals and companies. Number two, security threats evolve, and a standard clearly can evolve to meet those threats. So it's a living thing, and the working group is always sitting to talk about where should a standard go next. The standard expands over time, and that's something we're really going to touch on today, which is today you may have what you feel is a fairly well understood application space, but that may change tomorrow. A marketing person may say, hey, we need to change the way we deliver our products. With FDO and a standard, you get the best of all worlds in that it evolves, adds more capabilities. You can contribute yourself by joining the FIDO Alliance, but importantly, you've got this backward compatibility, so you can start using it today, but have confidence for the future. We touched on interoperability, the ability for customers or vendors to know that products from different companies can be mixed and matched and know they'll work nicely together. The point I wanted to make here about security analysis is that in many fields, it's required for a company, for its engineers to complete a security analysis of their overall solution. By adopting a standard, you know that that's being done as part of the overall FIDO Alliance effort, so you can have confidence in taking that solution, and it just reduces more of a burden on you as the engineering team. In terms of a proprietary solution, you clearly then have to maintain the software and update it as and when there are patches to the software. If you take a standard, the beauty there is obviously the providers of that software are going to keep it alive and following the changes in any patches that are required. And then lastly, but not least, with a proprietary solution, there's always the risk that if you have an expert in the field and that person leaves the company, clearly that leaves a hole in terms of any modifications you may need to make. Whereas a standard, clearly there's the intelligence is held across multiple people and it can continue to move forward. What about applications? Now, I'm going to show a kind of smorgasbord of applications, some of which are very much actively being worked on today by our partners. Some are frankly ideas where I personally believe FTO could be applied and bring real value. And I'll kind of touch on those as I go through. The first area where there's actually been a lot of work today is in the field of manufacturing. So if you have, in this case, we have a kind of generic picture of a factory, you have some kind of local server. In the speak of OPAF, for those of you who know the Open Process Automation Forum, that's called an ACP, but it could just be your local server. And then you're going to have a range of devices throughout the factories, PLCs, again, in the OPAF speak, the DCN, the distributed control nodes. It could be a robot. It could be a multitude of different things. Those will need to be safely onboarded to that local server. And that local server may, in addition, be onboarded to a cloud. And again, with FDO, you can do both sides of the coin. You can onboard the devices to the server and the server to the cloud. We could look at retail applications. Potentially, you've got point of sale devices inside the store. They're onboarded to a local server. And again, it goes to the retail cloud. Potentially, you've got security solutions that connect to a separate cloud. Again, FTO can be applied to both. Medical. Here I'm showing potentially a hospital where, again, you've got servers inside the hospital, you've got workstations, you've got blood pressure monitoring systems, you've got CT scanners, MRIs. All of these pieces of equipment will be connected back to local servers and again onto a cloud. That can be handled. But what about the case of if somebody has medical equipment at their home? Again, FDO can be applied to both. And although FDO is really focused on what we call non-trusted installers, i.e., this is where the person doing the installation, you really don't want them to know the credentials, you can apply it to something like in-house medical, where again, you really don't want the person to be involved with the credentials. You just want them to plug it in and know that their medical equipment safely onboards to the management platform. Let's look at something kind of rather different. And again, this in my mind is more of a concept than something that we're actively working on, but certainly I hope folk on the call would find this something that would resonate with them. Today, obviously, we increasingly hear of autonomous vehicles, but even long before that, vehicles today have well north of 100 million lines of code in them. And clearly, software updates is something that's just going from something that's rarely done to something in the future that I strongly suspect is going to become mandatory. So how can you onboard the vehicle to a cloud that does the onboarding when the software update? And again, FTO can be used for that type of an application. But you could take it one step further. Imagine now we're looking inside this vehicle where you've got a vehicle computer, it's talking to zone controllers, and those zone controllers are then talking onto a range of ECUs distributed throughout the car. And again, here, because FDO can scale from microcontrollers all the way up to high performance server processors, you could use FDO within the vehicle just as a closed network. So again, it could be used there. And it also could bring interesting applications where customers potentially in the future need to be able to procure an updated engine management system or some other ECU and want to have confidence that that device is a legitimate device and being onboarded to the car in a legitimate way. And clearly, as we move into the position where cars can be repaired at potentially multiple car facilities and garages rather than only going to a single brand, this ability to have security but equally openness, I think, could be an interesting dynamic. FDO architectures. I'll go through this pretty quickly. What I wanted to do here is just show you the flexibility. Later in the day, Jeff Cooper, who's one of the co-chairs of the working group, is going to go through in some detail explaining how you apply FDO in these architectures. So consider this a 50,000-foot flyover, and then to really understand how FDO is applied, listen to Jeff's presentation later in the day. The thing I want to stress here is FDO is highly flexible. if you're using a single cloud today, but you think in the future you might use multi-cloud, maybe you're going to move to a closed network or go close to an internet, or maybe you're moving from proprietary devices where the only thing you onboard is your hardware, but tomorrow you think maybe I'm going to have a bring my own device model, or you feel it might happen. FDO can support any of those situations. So it really bakes in flexibility for the future. So if we kind of walk our way through these scenarios, and they're in a somewhat linear fashion of complexity. Start number one, scenario one, you've got devices that are onboarding via the internet to a single cloud. And again, those devices may come from one vendor, which is probably the simplest configuration, or they could come from multiple vendors. The next logical situation may be that you have multiple clouds. And again, it could be single type of hardware that goes to multiple clouds, or it could be different types of hardwares going to multiple clouds. And maybe you have multiple clouds because one of those clouds is a proprietary one that you run. And maybe in your case, you also have customers who say, no, we want to run our own cloud solution. We need the ability to onboard to our cloud. It may be a legal thing. Maybe you need, because of geography, to have a cloud in Germany and a cloud in the US. Again, something that can be supported readily by FDO. What about it's a closed situation? It's on-premise or closed network. You have to air gap your facility. You don't want data leaving it. Again, FDO can support that. And when you hear Jenna from Dell present a little bit later, she'll be talking about how Dell has addressed that in their native edge solution. Then we get to the next level of complexity, and you can see the picture building here, where you can literally mix and match. So maybe you've got some cloud access with an internet, some is on-prem, and you've really got both. Absolutely doable with FDO. Then one configuration that folk often talk about is multi-tenant. And clearly, if you have three customers all within maybe potentially the same field of operation, maybe they all manufacture pharmaceuticals as an example, clearly there's a great sensitivity that no data from customer one is transferred to customer three. But you need a multi-tenant situation because you want it all running in a single cloud. What FDO does is it gives you the ability to support multi-tenant, but it gives you the confidence to know that devices only end up getting onboarded to exactly the tenant they should be onboarded to. And then last but not least, you bring it all together. You've got on-prem, you've got off-prem, you've got multi-tenant. Heck, maybe you've even got roaming devices out there as well, all doable with FDO. Now, I think the point here is FDO is very flexible and it's highly extensible. So when you look at it, whether you start with single cloud today, but you feel in the future you'll have multi-cloud or multi-tenant, FDO can grow with your needs. So you can invest today, but have confidence it will meet your needs for tomorrow. Now, during today's presentation, we've got a packed agenda, and you're going to hear from many companies talking about their implementation of FDO. Now, one, unfortunately, who couldn't be here is ExxonMobil, and I'll just give a quick summary of what they're doing on their behalf. They're a leader in an open standard called OPAF, and in fact, Kirk Smith from Intel will talk about OPAF and how that fits with FDO. But they've used FDO successfully with Yokogawa in their Texas testbed. They're moving now to a manufacturing facility in Baton Rouge. And there together, they've integrated FDO into their automated device installation solution. And they're collaborating with a range of IT and OT suppliers. Now, rather than just hear me talk about it, you'll see there's a QR code in the top corner or in the middle at the top. If you click on that, it will lead you to David Hedge, who's a senior engineer at ExxonMobil, and you can watch his video really showing him take a device and then completely onboard it using FDO and other tools. So again, if you got the time, go watch David present that. Business questions. We only have a few minutes left, so I'll go rapidly through these. People often ask me, who created it? Well, FDO, the editors for FDO was a range of companies or individuals from Intel, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Qualcomm, and ARM. So pretty much a who's who of technologies. Question number 2, do I need to join the FIDO Alliance to use the specifications? No, you don't. You can download the specification. Clearly, if you join the FIDO Alliance, that lets you become impactful in terms of where the system goes in the future. What about license agreements? You can click on this link and it will take you through to the FIDO IPR terms. What about certification? Do I need to pay? Yes, the FIDO Alliance has a paid certification program. There's no obligation for you to certify your products, but if you do want to put the logo on them, then you do need to certify. If you join, you get a discount on certifications. And then on the software side of it, great having the spec. What about the software? Do I have to pay for it? Well, the answer is there's lots of software available. Some is open source and commercially available. There's a range of different options, and you'll hear about some of them today. I talked about the flexibility. Jeff is going to touch on this. There's one capability in particular called FSIMs within FDO. And it basically is an embedded protocol within FDO that performs onboarding actions like file transfers or shell commands. So what does that mean to you? It means you can really do things that are very cool above and beyond just purely onboarding. You could, as an example, ship empty hardware with just FDO on it, and then at the facility or at some other point, download the software load. Or maybe you say, no, I want to ship my product with all the software, but I know full well 6 months, a year from now, I'm going to have to do firmware updates. You can trigger that capability with FDO. So it really allows you to innovate on top of FDO. Think of it as far more than just a pure onboarding. Think of it as a very powerful, very flexible solution. Covered a lot of ground here. We've got about a minute left to go. So really, in summary, FDO is very flexible and highly extensible. There are a wide range of deployment architectures supported, and I just touched on a few of how those that you could potentially use. Customers can evolve their architecture. So you could start on one, but if something changes, you can move to the other and know that effectively you don't have to waste all of the time and energy you've invested. FDO has been developed to offer a high degree of security. And as we said, no solution you can say for the future is absolutely secure, but there's a lot of thought that's gone into it. But you can also make decisions on how to extend the security. And Jeff's going to touch on that. There's some very interesting things you can do there. You can also change the way you store credentials. Maybe you've got a microcontroller, maybe you have a TPM. It lets you do that. We talked about the flexibility across processors and operating systems. So in summary, really FDO is about meeting your onboarding needs today, but it's also about meeting those that you need for tomorrow. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Richard. I did have one request. We're going to hop over to our next session in just a second, but could you share the QR for the when you're talking about Exxon, are you able to share that again? Or just send me the link and I'll make sure I pop that in the chat because there were a couple people who missed that.
I'll do that. I'll pop it in for you in the chat to you.
Okay, perfect. So we'll send that out to the audience because I know some folks were hoping to dig into that a little more.